Last night, Cantor Schloss, our Shaliach Tzibor, our liaison to God, chanted Kol Nidre so beautifully on our behalf, praying, God, forgive us the vows we will make this year that will undoubtedly be broken in the year ahead. Pledges to be gentler, kinder, less materialistic, more supportive, allowing the positive COVID-19 lessons to carry over with us into the new year. Each of us can fill in the blank in terms of what we pledge. Let's face it, many of those pledges disappeared as our Zoom streams went dark last night. Do any of them warrant inscription in the book of life? What are our bargaining chips with God? What pledge can we give to God that will redound in God's ultimate blessing upon us? We see our shortcomings vividly reflected in the holiness of this day. No one is perfect. Each one has frailty. Each one has known defeat. On Yom Kippur, we not only recognize our frailty, but we acknowledge it publicly with each pound of the chest while echoing the words of Ashamnu. We indeed have missed the mark. We peer into our brokenness, our personal suffering, and pray we emerge at sunset today more whole, more sensitive, more human. Brian Stevenson, in his book Just Mercy, wrote, "We are all broken by something. We have all hurt someone and have been hurt. We all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equivalent. Sometimes we're fractured by the choices we make. Sometimes we're shattered by things we would never have chosen. But our brokenness is the source of our common humanity, the basis for our shared search for comfort, meaning, and healing. Our shared vulnerability and imperfection nurtures and sustains our capacity for compassion. We have a choice. We can embrace our humanness, which means embracing our broken nature, and the compassion that remains is our best hope for healing. Or we can deny our brokenness, forswear compassion, and as a result, deny our own humanity. And let me add, when we deny our own humanity, we deny God's existence in the world. Indeed, this past year has been wrought with personal disappointments and challenges, and it's been a tough year as Americans. Many of us, to quote Rosa Parks, are tired, tired, tired. How do we stand before God this day, knowing how far our country has moved away from civility, how deep political divisions are like life quakes swallowing up our humility and our humanity? What merits do we bring before God, individually and collectively? Who provides us with inspiration for the year to come? The following story, paid in full, told by Rabbi Goel El-Karif, who allegedly heard it from the person himself, can give us direction this day. There was a fellow who owned a jewelry store in Israel. One day, a 9-year-old girl walked into the store and said, "I'm here to buy a bracelet." She looked through the glass case and pointed to a bracelet that was more than 10,000 shekels, $3,000. The man behind the counter asked her, "You want to buy that bracelet?" "Yes," she replied. "Wow, you have good taste," he said. "Who do you want to buy it for?" "For my older sister." "Oh, that is so nice," the storekeeper replied. "Why do you want to buy your older sister that bracelet?" "Because I don't have a mother or father," the little girl said, "and my older sister takes care of us. So we want to buy her a present, and I'm willing to pay for it." She pulled out of her pocket a whole bunch of coins that totaled just under 8 shekels, about $2. The fellow said, "Wow, that's exactly what the bracelet costs." While wrapping up the bracelet, he said to the girl, "You write a card to your sister while I wrap this gift." He finished wrapping the bracelet, wiped away his tears, and handed the girl the bracelet. A few hours later, the older sister entered the store. "I'm terribly embarrassed," she said. "My sister should not have come here. She should not have taken it without paying." "What are you talking about?" the storekeeper asked. "What do you mean? This bracelet costs thousands of shekels. My little sister doesn't have thousands of shekels. She doesn't even have 10 shekels. Obviously, she didn't pay for it." "You couldn't be more wrong," the storekeeper replied. "She paid me in full. She paid me 7 shekels, 80 agorot, and a broken heart. I want to tell you something. I am a widower. I lost my wife a number of years ago. People come into my store every single day. They come in and buy expensive pieces of jewelry, and all these people can afford it. When your sister walked in, for the first time in so very long since my wife's death, I once again felt what love means. He gave her the bracelet, and he wished her well. During these high holy days, we come to the Almighty, and we want to buy something very expensive. We want to buy life, but we can't afford it. We don't have enough money to pay for it. We don't have the merits. We are broken. So we come to the Almighty and we empty out our pockets, giving God whatever merits we have, plus promises for the future. I'll pick up the phone and call somebody who is lonely. I'll be scrupulous about not speaking Lashon Hara, gossip, for 1 hour a day. The Almighty says, you don't know how long it's been since I felt what love means. God sees how much we love our Creator and how much we yearn to improve, and God says, you know what? You have touched my heart. Here it is, paid in full. And often in our brokenness, we look to others for inspiration. When we seek out those Gidolei Hador, those great heroes of our generation whose tireless efforts brought good into the world and championed the forces of evil and oppression. Those whose life landscapes were trapeze bars sailing through the air with intentionality and purpose, undeterred by swing disruptors. The world has always looked to heroes for strength, some real and some fictional. In the 1930s, a hero was needed to counter Hitler's rise to power and the waves of anti-Semitism and xenophobia sweeping our land and world. During the height of anti-Semitism in 1938, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created Superman, a hero who came from a faraway place, a place called Krypton, whose Krypton name was Kol El, Hebrew for voice of God. Superman, the dark-haired, dark-eyed immigrant, combated the forces of evil. The vast majority of Jewish youth who read Superman today are clueless as to his Jewish links. Many here can recall Superman's catchphrase, truth, justice, and the American way. Today, many of us are shaking our heads trying to find truth, upholding justice, and defining exactly what that American way is. In 1938, the same year Superman exploded on the scene, a poll found that 60% of Americans held Jews in low esteem, calling them greedy, dishonest, and pushy. A 1939 Roper poll found that only 39% of Americans saw Jews as worthy of being treated like other people, and 53% said Jews are different and should be restricted. Can there be any doubt as to why Jews and blacks became allies by the 1950s, or why Kivi Kaplan sat on the board of the NAACP in 1954 and became its president in 1966? The opening lines of the V'ahavta prayer commands us to love Adonai, our God, with all our hearts and all of our souls and all of our might. So how on this Yom Kippur day do we show our love to God? How do we pay our pledges in full? What is our most precious bargaining chip? What can we collectively pledge this day that demonstrates our love for God, that merits God's love for us? In the V'ahavta, we also read the words, V'shinantam levanecha, you shall teach them to your children. Even when we are tired and broken, when we don't have sufficient merit chips in our pockets, we must nurture our most precious gift to God, our children, the generation standing in our shadow while we are in flight from the fight. Our youth need role models today, men and women who have championed causes for justice and right, young adults possessing idealism and tenacity, who pick up the mantle of justice and love when we are tired and broken. Today I would like to speak to you about two individuals, great ones of our generation, who have died in recent days and months, but leave a rich legacy, a legacy that began when they were part of a new generation. Even in their death, they are teachers of hope, determination, and change. Representative John Lewis and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Last night I spoke about racism in our country, past and present. During the tumultuous years of the civil rights movement, when fire bombings and lynchings were routine, it was youth who stepped forward and said, Hinenu, here we are. Send us as nonviolent protectors of liberty and justice. The Freedom Riders of the 1960s, those hundreds of mostly college students and young adults, black and white, including John Lewis, a sharecropper's son, inspired by Dr. King, put their lives at risk for social change, striving to create Dr. King's beloved community. In reflecting on the Freedom Riders, Raymond Arnezolt, professor of Southern history, stated, "The riders' dangerous passage through the bus terminals and jails of the Jim Crow South represented only one part of an extended journey for justice that stretched back to the dawn of American history and beyond. But once that passage was completed, there was renewed hope that the nation would eventually find its way to a true and more inclusive democracy." John Lewis, with laser precision, remained focused on that goal throughout each day of his life. In March of 1963, Lewis became chair of SNCC's Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and was one of the Big Six coordinators of the March on Washington. In his address there, Lewis said, "We all recognize the fact that if any racial, social, political, and economic changes are to take place in our society, the people, the masses, must bring it about." 2 years later, at the age of 25, John Lewis led over 600 marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and faced brutal attacks by oncoming state troopers. Footage of the violence collectively shocked the nation and galvanized the fight against racial injustice. Lewis later testified in court that he was knocked to the ground and a state trooper then hit him in the head with a nightstick. When Lewis shielded his head with a hand, the trooper hit Lewis again as he tried to get up. Racism in law enforcement also has deep roots within our nation. Yet personal injury didn't deter Lewis from his goal. Just 2 weeks after that brutal beating, what parent would have allowed it? Lewis and 11 others, including Dr. King and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, locked arms and crossed the Pettus Bridge again. At the time of Bloody Sunday in Selma, there were only 5 African Americans in the House of Representatives and no black senators. Indeed, affecting full civil rights was to be an uphill battle in rarefied air. After Bloody Sunday, Lewis could have screamed Dayenu, yet he persisted. The first black senator of the 20th century, Edward Brooke, was elected 2 years after Bloody Sunday, and 22 years later, Lewis and 22 other black Americans were elected to the 100th Congress of the United States. At the time of his election, blacks made up only 4% of the Congress, yet John Lewis's dedication in his life to making a difference, and at one point stated, "Nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society." Representative Lewis's connection with the Jewish community continued throughout his career, even when the relationships between blacks and Jews turned rather icy. A July Newsweek opinion article stated, "Lewis's outreach to Jews wasn't about politics or pragmatism. Rather, it was grounded in a deep sense of kinship with Jews, rooted both in biblical teachings and his formative experiences as a child growing up in the rural South." In his memoir, Walking with the Wind, Lewis remembered hearing anti-Semitic barbs that stung him to the quick. "I felt a kinship with the children of Israel," he wrote. "I could see that their struggle was very similar to ours." In the 80s, he championed the rights of Soviet Jews. He was a friend to Israel and denounced anti-Semitic rhetoric. In his memoir, he stated, "I believe in freedom of speech, but I also believe that we have an obligation to condemn speech that is racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic, or hateful." Similarly, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was an iconic champion of rights, particularly surrounding the issue of gender equality. As I said on Rosh Hashanah morning during Torah study, the title Justice Ginsburg applied in 2 ways: descriptive of her critical role as a jurist on the Supreme Court and her lifelong pursuit of doing tzedek, that which is right and just. Many of us have seen the movie On the Basis of Sex or read Notorious RBG. Like Lewis, Ruth Bader Ginsburg started from rather humble beginnings. Her mother worked in the garment district and her father was a furrier, not quite sure how many furs were in demand during the Great Depression when she grew up. We've read the barriers she faced, Smithsonian Magazine stated, along the way, she shattered glass ceilings and racked up accolades. First person to be a member of both the Harvard and Columbia Law Reviews, tied for first in her class at Columbia. Yet come graduation, she found herself shut out from job opportunities until a Columbia professor flat out refused to suggest any other clerkship candidates but her for a position under a New York district judge. I was Jewish, a woman, and a mother. The first raised one eyebrow, the second two. The third made me indubitably inadmissible. The notorious RGB was a 5-foot towering giant and made impact after impact after impact. She, like Lewis, Justice Ginsburg, was influenced by her background. Being Jewish, knowing the sting of anti-Semitism and the horror of the Holocaust influenced her passion for justice. She wrote, "My heritage as a Jew and my occupation as a judge fit together symmetrically." The demand for justice runs through the entirety of the Jewish history and Jewish tradition. Indeed, Justice Ginsburg, like John Lewis, hit numerous potholes on the road of life. Professors who criticized her for taking the place of men in law school. I had a cousin who was a rabbi who made a similar comment to me when I was a rabbinical student, just 6 years after the first woman was ordained. I'm certain many of us here can remember comments hurled to put women in their place. One post I read in recent days said the following: if you are a woman and hold a job, you have Justice Ginsburg to thank. If you were able to keep that job even when you became pregnant, you have Justice Ginsburg to thank. If you hold a credit card or a bank account or a house in your name without the permission of your husband or father, you have Justice Ginsburg to thank. Indeed, when my father died in 1973, my mother couldn't qualify for a credit card. The law didn't change until 1974, and Bloomingdale settled a lawsuit in 1978 for its discrimination in granting credit cards based upon gender. And RBG championed the cause of men as well, whose wives worked and died to receive their Social Security benefit. Gender equality was a two-way street. John Lewis and the notorious RBG had the moxie to fight, face all odds, and never relent in their passion for making the world a more human, a more compassionate, and equal place. Their greatest gift lie not only in their ultimate contributions, but in making real the dreams and ideals of their youth, providing an unflappable role model for our youth today. They are exemplars of the human, ever-ready bunny, boundless in energy. Like the Olympic torch runners, RBG and John Lewis ignited the flames of justice and have passed those glowing embers to the next generation. The vision and power of youth are our greatest bargaining chips. On May 1st, 1970, decades before social media's impact, I was one of the 4 million students that shut down 450 universities and high schools protesting President Nixon sending troops to Cambodia. Ultimately, 3 days later, 4 dead in Ohio, as the Kent State killings brought youthful protest to a grinding halt. And 2 years prior, on the south side of Chicago, 35,000 Black and Latino students walked out of Chicago public high schools protesting Chicago's segregated school system. Sadly, I don't remember that protest, probably just another example of invisible minorities, yet the school protest flung open the doors for school integration in Chicago. Youth's boundless energy, idealism, and perhaps a dash of naivete are the right formula to effect change. The current generation, my generation, that had protest engraved in our souls, products of Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Simon and Garfunkel, Joan Baez, Peter, Paul, and Mary, didn't have the momentum, in many instances, to continue the cries against injustice, and in many ways we have failed the current generation of youth. Our pockets are somewhat empty. Therefore, our pledge today must be youth, students, young adults who breathe life into the fragile lit torch and like a blacksmith's piston bellows, ignite a blaming flame of justice. For climate justice, to gun control, to a rainbow of religious and ethnicities fighting for racial and sexual identity inclusion, the youth lead our way. less than 6 weeks after the massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Still traumatized students organized the March for Our Lives in Washington. According to a Pew report, something familiar happened in America in February. A gunman walked into a school, shot and killed 17 students and staff in a horrific act of violence. But then something unfamiliar happened. State legislatures, inspired by a movement led by the student survivors of that mass shooting, started passing legislation to restrict gun access. States across the country enacted more than 70 new laws restricting gun access in the wake of the Parkland massacre. We must not allow our students, our children, to be tired, and tired, or as jaded as some of us have become. John Lewis said, every generation leaves behind a legacy. Each generation must hear Kal El, God's call, God's voice. Ours must be to inspire our youth, despite our weariness at times, and to be brave. L'shinantam levanecha. We need to model for our children that love and not indifference, inclusion and not exclusion must be their weapons and tools for change. Like the girl in the jewelry store who reminded the storekeeper of the meaning of love, perhaps our making that supportive pledge to the next generation will enable God to say, you have touched my heart. Here it is, paid in full. Ken Yehi Ratzon.